So I'm delighted to be joined once again by Ben Cross. Ben, welcome back to Careers in Discovery.
Thanks very much. Nice to be back.
Good to see you. And can you believe it was April 2019, your last appearance, 5 years ago?
Can't believe it. It's astonishing. I'd have 3 years I could just about take, but 5 years,
Yeah.
no way. That doesn't stack up. So it feels like it's gone by in a blink of an eye. A good
I know.
blink for the most
Yes.
part. There's been some ups and downs, of course, globally in that time, but
Well, this is it. It was pre-COVID.
it was, yeah, different world.
I guess, wars in Europe and Israel, pre-everything, right? There's so much has happened.
Everything was
since then.
simpler back then.
It was.
In rose-tinted glasses.
That's the thing, though, isn't it? It seems like it was so short a time ago, but then when you look back, actually, what's happened in that period, you think, actually, yeah, it probably was quite a long time.
Yeah, I definitely feel older. I'll say that.
Fair enough. Well, you haven't aged a day, Ben. You look
Thanks,
great.
Tom. Always nice to hear. That's why I joined this podcast.
There you go. So no, it's been a while, and obviously when we were speaking then, you were with Horizon Discovery, head of functional genomics over there. And I remember we spent a lot of the interview with you very patiently explaining to me what functional genomics was, which I appreciate.
I suspect the patience was the other way around. I imagine I waffled on. Well, I know I waffled on for a long, long time. So
Not
I'm
at all.
of course, I'm very concise now in my, aged and wise state. So I'm not going to waffle on at all. Honest.
No, exactly. We've all been working on our skills and.
Exactly.
But you've made the transition now to PhoreMost, and you're there as the CTO. Be great to first of all just hear a bit about, PhoreMost is a company we've featured on the podcast before, but again, it's been a while.
Yeah.
It'd be great to hear about where the company's at, your role there, what you're up to, what's happening in your world these days.
Yeah, I'd be delighted. I'll do my best to keep it on interesting terms. So, yeah, PhoreMost is a company based in Cambridge as well. I knew of PhoreMost as they started because we were working together from Horizon. Yes. Of course, we share a co-founder in Chris Torrance, and so there's a lot of interconnections between my previous company and this one. But we're a very, very different company now to we were back in 2019 and before, because the company has a proprietary technology that we call GlueSeeker. We use it in lots of different ways, but it's kind of an analog to CRISPR technology, which is what we spend a lot of time talking about, and of course what Horizon have made a fantastic business of generating new tools and providing services for. But we obviously wanted to use that in the context of making our own drug discovery programs,
right?
And that takes time.
Yes,
we are now in the fortunate position of having our own drug discovery programs, which are going very, very well. Those are things which are born from a biological platform, but now are in the process of getting towards sort of, real small molecule assets that we're very, very excited about. Very briefly, what the technology is, we use something that we call mini proteins, which are, as they sound, hopefully that's quite descriptive, small little fragments of protein.
Yes.
And we use them to find new things out. We chuck them into cells, we see what they do. If they do something interesting, we can measure it, and then we later on find out what the kind of mechanics, what the cellular process that you are affecting, and what can we learn from that event that teaches us something new and interesting about drug discovery. So that is a fishing exercise. You go out, you find out what's going on, and then you get lucky sometimes, and sometimes you don't. But we spent about the last sort of 4 years mostly gearing what we had learned in the previous 4 years at least, configuring that kind of mini protein idea into something that really then blossomed. And it blossomed into this sector, this field, this space, this bit of biology called targeted protein degradation. So now pretty much everything we are doing, what we're thinking about, is to do with this field of targeted protein degradation. Yes, and how can we use everything we've learned to make some interesting new molecules and a lot of new interesting observations and discoveries learned along the way. So that's the kind of technology. We're about 50 people. We're based here in Unity campus. We were previously at the Babraham as a sort of startup. We've got as we grew, we sort of ended up split across sites, and then we moved to come to a single building. We built this sort of facility for ourselves in the Unity campus, the first building that works, which had back then there was nobody else. There's no biotechs in it, so we were
Right.
we were the second biotech in it.
Yeah.
But it's now a blossoming new biotech park, and our space in it is lovely because we sort of designed it ourselves. It's kind of an industrial sheet. You can see the exposed concrete behind us, and as we were just discussing, the ping pong tables and the breakout space and the colours. So it's actually a really, really nice place to be, and importantly for us, we're all together. And why that's important for PhoreMost is because we have this proprietary technology, but as I said, we also end up right down in the late stages of drug discovery, getting towards building our preclinical programs. So we have a massive diversity of people, skills, experience, ideas, from computational scientists in chemistry and biology, all the way through biochemistry, biophysics, cell biology, and to medicinal chemists who are really doing the kind of nuts and bolts of the building of the small molecules. So it's really important for us to be together because we learn so much together. There's a lot of beautiful organic communication that goes on that is incredibly important to a company our size. So we feel very lucky that we've got this nice space to be. So that's PhoreMost. We do drug discovery.
and in targeted protein degradation, which of course is a growing field, right? And I think I remember hearing about this a few years back, but it seems to be really taking off and people getting their head around it now.
It's one of the fields, globally speaking, if you look at sectors that had a bit of a dint, and those would have continued, the TPD field, even throughout the kind of 22, 23 doldrums of the biotech sector, was one of the few areas that maintained its momentum because it had that fortuitous sort of moment of everything suddenly coming together. It's a kind of 15-year-old, 20-year-old technology, but just was starting to kind of get some lift off. And for me personally, that's actually also the closest to my academic training. My academic training is in protein stasis, and so this was a kind of very nice opportunity for me to get back in and join those dots from my academic training into what I'm trying to do in translational science. So it's a super exciting field, and we're very happy to be able to contribute to it.
Absolutely. And so you're the CTO for the company, and this is me surmising, so please correct me if I'm wrong, because I know there's also a CSO in the business. I'm assuming that he's responsible for kind of overseeing the discovery programs and driving them forward, and you look after the platform and the capability of the platform and enhancing that, and how the platform interacts with those programs and that kind of stuff. Is that about right?
That's a pretty decent. I mean, there's a big Venn diagram and we all overlap. So we have a relatively small exec team. So there's me and Charlie and Rich and Christian and Neil. So we, between us, look after everything. But we have our, areas of specialism, if you like. And my area of specialism is on the platform. So I spend, a lot of my time looking after that, developing that, and managing it as well. So that's kind of solely my responsibility, I suppose. Whereas the drug discovery is looked after by Christian and Rich for the most part, but we all interact collectively. And that actually is a very good description of, what's it like to be a CTO? It's a lot about that sort of interactions and who's got what and how do we all make sure we're pushing all in the right direction, the same direction simultaneously. And it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of good teamwork at that exec level. So it's been a great and informative journey for me to be able to develop in that part of my career.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that we're seeing more of these type of CTO roles in biotech, as opposed to the sort of technology from a IT point of view, CTO.
You should see the garbage I get through my LinkedIn asking me if I can help them with your cybersecurity, and then you maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But there's more and more of them, isn't there? And I think it's interesting to see. Everyone is defined slightly differently, of course, but it's interesting to see this dual approach of application and capability. And people really looking at, well, how do we make the most of this technology that we have, and how do we continually improve it, rather than just, okay, we've got a technology, let's put it into a drug discovery program.
I think the cleanest way to bracket that is in platform companies, and the UK is brilliant at generating platform companies because we're fantastic at spinning things out, especially from Cambridge. But quite often the easiest thing to do with a new idea or a new concept or invention is to turn it into a sort of platform, because the application part is hard. That is the challenging bit. What are you actually going to do with this cool thing?
Yeah.
But the CTO role is certainly here for me, and in many other places, is the kind of guardian, the custodian of of the platform pioneer, like you say, trying to turn it into something which actually delivers. Because it's obviously not enough just to be, turning the handle on something that's not very interesting or useful to anyone. We've got to make it do something which actually contributes, and that we can follow up, and in our case, turn into drug discovery or whatever else. It can be all sorts of different things. So I think that's it, because actually, yes, I do a lot of work in the computational side, and that has a sort of T component to it, and there is a lot of biological technology that is very specialist to PhoreMost. Although a lot of that background I brought with me from my training and development at Horizon as well, so there's a lot of overlaps from the technical perspective, but it's mostly about that kind of, this is a platform, this is the thing that they are. Our identity in some ways for PhoreMost is based on the platform, and then you have to try and gear it to something that delivers.
Yes. No, that makes sense. And I want to come back a little bit to that transition into the executive team and kind of the different elements that's added to your role. Because I think that's an interesting insight for people. But I guess it'd be good to kind of recap the journey from 2019 a little bit before then. So last time we spoke, you were running a pretty sizable team at Horizon, looking after functional genomic screening and operating in that technical leadership role. Still very close to the science.
Pretty close.
From what I remember. But take us through very briefly the sort of last 5 years, the transition to PhoreMost, the things that have happened on the way.
I think I wonder if my team was probably bigger when I was at Horizon than it is now, but very different. So back in 2019, where I was at with my own personal journey, and where the platform that I'd helped build at Horizon was that it was kind of ready for someone new to take it on. And I'd spent, I was there for 6 years. I absolutely loved my time at Horizon, made some fantastic friends and colleagues. We did brilliant things, and I really, really enjoyed it and learned a crazy amount. But I'd got to the point where I'd been building this platform, and that's kind of my passion. I like to build things and I like to apply them. But, the big part of the excitement for me is in the building phase. Maybe we can come back to that, actually, because we may be doing some announcements.
Okay. All right.
Depends when this goes out, but I can talk about it. We can always edit the podcast.
We can do it in 2 parts, perhaps.
But so I'd spent a lot of time building it, and this CRISPR platform interacted massively, because we ended up commercializing it as a service, and so we were working with other people in pharma and biotech, and I was learning a lot about how they were using what we kind of developed and the contributions we made. But to a translational output, and I'd obviously started to get, hey, that kind of sounds exciting. I would like to make that leap into translating it into something, in drug discovery or wherever else. But there was clearly this kind of sense in me that I wanted to be able to do that. And letting the data go and saying bye-bye was maybe not as satisfying by the end of my tenure at Horizon as it was the beginning. But there was also this big part that I had this fantastic team, and there were brilliant scientists and emerging leaders already at Horizon who I could see I was holding back. To be quite brutal about it, I felt like they would be just as good as me or better and take it in different directions, and I was holding them back by being present there. And if I had other ambitions, then that I should take them. But that would be ridiculous. I didn't just leave a job because I was so nice. I actually had another opportunity. And PhoreMost came along. I'd been working with Chris for a long time. Kind of a long romance, and we got to a point where it made sense for me to come in and join PhoreMost as Marcus was moving on. And PhoreMost was at a time where my skill set was probably going to add something that it might not have added 2-3 years previously, because the platform by that point had sort of got to a sort of starting position. We knew a lot about it at that point, but it needed that leap to the application, and I felt like that was something I was excited by and I could help with. So I took the opportunity that came along that made sense, and never looked back. And it's been absolutely a regret-free transition. I don't think that's very often the case.
No.
Obviously, there's great things about where I was at Horizon I kind of miss a little bit, and there's lots of stuff in the role that we can maybe come back to that is very different. That I can have some rose tinted spectacles about as well, from previous positions. But yeah, we've just done some great stuff. I'm very lucky to come to a fantastic team already, and then we were able to build on that. And that was the thing I was most worried about, transitioning from one place to another, especially if you've got something that's kind of unique maybe, or that you feel like it's got its own momentum, its own culture, kind of mini culture that we built in my team in Horizon. It really did feel special. It really did feel like people were connected and we're all firing in the same direction. And you need to do that again. You need to come into a new place that already exists in this case, and then try and find a way to make it feel like it's that special place again. And very, very lucky at PhoreMost that we've got exactly that. So it's been a fun journey.
And it's always a risk, isn't it? Because, as much as you knew Chris, so that sort of gives you a bit more insight into what the culture is likely to be like, and a little bit more sort of familiarity. But, it's hard to understand the company's culture from the outside.
I'd say it's basically impossible. In fact, I didn't just know Chris. I knew Charlie. I knew a couple of people. I spent ages as well, talking to the team. Right. And of course, I'd consulted for PhoreMost at Horizon, and we were there right there founding, and we helped them establish the platform. In fact, a lot of the stuff we did early on, I was quite involved in trying to help, some of the foundational technology at PhoreMost. We were right there at the beginning in my guys at Horizon, but it didn't tell me anything. Right. Honestly, I don't think I could have known more about a company.
No.
But when you actually start and you get in the door, it still doesn't tell you anything really. You could have a completely different. And I've had other times in my career that we won't go into, I don't think, where I've done similarly and it's gone the opposite. Thought I knew everything, did all my due diligence, thought I understood everything, get in the door on day one, and oh my God, totally different to what I expected. That doesn't mean to say you shouldn't do all that work, do all that hard graft, but you should be well aware when you start any new place that you just don't know. There's so much going on that you can't possibly absorb it all. There's so much subtlety.
Yeah,
it's so important.
Absolutely, as you say, you absolutely should do the due diligence, and you want to mitigate the risk as much as possible. You can't get rid of it. The risk that it's not going to be the right fit, but there are of course things you can do. But it's kind of like when you buy a house, right? And you're allowed to see it for 15 minutes, and then they ask you for £500,000.
Absolutely, it's a roll of a dice.
Yeah,
but that's where I don't know, kind of intuition and a lot of this sort of subtle stuff that you didn't, the stuff you can't write down and tick off actually comes into it. In the end, you got to go, does this feel right? And have I done my best to make, like you say, some sort of risk mitigation? And do you believe that, is it if it works out in a surprising and negative way, do you believe you have the power to kind of change it for the good? And I think if you go in with that kind of belief and that strength of conviction, then you can probably, you can tolerate the surprise a lot better.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In my case, it wasn't, like I say, I didn't know anything really. There's so many gaps. But they ended up being the fun bits for me in PhoreMost. The stuff I didn't know was stuff that, this is, there's a lot more to learn, both technically and politically, and about the teams, the interactions, the characters, the culture. And they were all good stuff. It was all stuff that I was not expecting, but I knew that we were already onto a winner from day one. I could feel that there's good stuff to come.
Yes. And you mentioned this sort of part of the driver for the move was that you had this itch you wanted to scratch about getting closer to the patient, I suppose, getting into more translational work, getting into stuff that's that step further along to being applied, which I think is a situation that a lot of scientists find themselves in, whether it's that they're sat in academia and they want to move into industry, or as you say, they might be working for a service company or a CRO or something like that, and they want to go into the kind of the biotech side of it in inverted commas, right? And I think it's a situation a lot of people find themselves in. So having made that transition, what have been the things, I suppose, what have been the key differences, and perhaps what have been some things that maybe you weren't expecting that are different about it?
Well, for me also, it was kind of going back to, I had a sort of circle. I had this science area, this proteostasis area that I was kind of returning to, but I also had a kind of going back towards drug discovery because I'd done a bit of drug discovery in my academic career, but as an academic. And when I left academia with that drug discovery experience, I was left with that's probably what created the itch, because we didn't actually progress my program to the where it could have gone in terms of its fruition. Right. But when I was at Horizon, I hope I didn't mention this on the last podcast. Sounds like a really boring old story now, but I ended up collaborating with 3 different companies and groups that were working on the molecule I discovered in my postdoc. Yeah. And they were translating it, and I just wasn't sharp enough to know I could have done that. I could have taken that program. I could have founded a company. And it was a bit of an eye opener and a bit of a hey moment. So coming to PhoreMost gave me an opportunity to sort of close that circle a little bit as well. But for me, the lessons or the differences is mostly, it's very, very hard to learn to sort of fail more often because, drug discovery, in fact, where I was at Horizon, we were characterized by generating people data, screening as it was there. And a lot of stuff I've done here is about screening. And that is characterizable by the generation of hope, Screen, generally speaking, unless you absolutely muck it up, it's going to give you something interesting, something to follow up and something to start. It's that kind of beginning, the genesis phase of drug discovery. And so it's incredibly positive in almost all guises. And like I say, unless you totally muck it up. And drug discovery is the opposite. Drug discovery is about failure.
Right, yes.
Day in, day out. It's failing. Something's not working. Something unexpected has happened. You don't understand everything, but you've got to somehow move forward. And that is a great experience. You can only live that. You can only learn that by living it. You can only get the resilience and the pragmatism and the kind of the altitude, sort of high altitude perspective of what matters, what's critical path, by actually living that process. So for me, that experience of getting into the translational part of drug discovery in the context of industry versus academia was a brilliant kind of educating experience for me from the kind of that challenge of drug discovery. And it also, I'd characterize it maybe in one other way, because in a platform company, or maybe in Horizon, I think it was reasonable to have a sort of fail fast type mindset in a way, because we're working on margins, we're working on time, we're working on aspects of success criteria which are about our interaction with other people's data. Have we done the job well? Have they approved of it? Have we delivered the data? We're away. And so you actually do need to get into kind of quite a strict mindset. It's not quite the same as a sort of fail fast in a sort of tech context.
No, of course, yeah.
But you need to be quite strict about what you're doing and to be able to move on quite quickly to the next thing that's sort of more profitable or whatever else. In drug discovery, I think there's a lot of debate about whether or not that's a good way to be.
Right.
Should be. Right, should fail fast. Fail fast seems like it's always a good idea. But I would say one of the overarching sort of experiences I've had of drug discovery, both here and sort of more broadly with collaborations we've been able to have, is that fail fast is actually a pretty dangerous game to play in drug discovery, because you've actually got to really work hard. You've really got to put the elbow grease in, and you've really got to crack things. And sometimes you can compromise your success by turfing out your conviction for a promise of sort of an easy or a path of least resistance. And that balance is actually quite different, I think, when it comes to these very hard problems of drug discovery and really, big unexpected things. You've got to get to an end, but you've got to get to an answer. And it might not be the answer you wanted at the beginning, and it might not be the answer that even tells you where to go next, but you actually have to get there. And that, I think, is somehow antithetical to a kind of classical fail fast, process. So that was quite a big eye opener as well, doing the hard graft.
Yeah, and I suppose that ties into the sort of the resource allocation sort of side of it, doesn't it? In that you can't continually, well, let's try it and see what happens, because it all costs money, it all takes time, it all consumes brain power, as you say. I guess there's an acceptance that some things will fail, but you have to try and find the things.
It's a somewhat subtle difference, but you're still doing all those things that you've got to do. You've got to mitigate risk, you've got to have backup strategies, you've got to anticipate failure, and where to go next in it. And luckily, like I say, we're not a massive company, and we can stay incredibly agile. We've got a very dynamic team, and they can move things around very, very quickly. And us in the executive team have got the main responsibility of making those decisions as best as we can, and most importantly, translating them to everyone else, so that we all understand where we are, and there's great transparency with what our sort of strategic mission is, and if we have to make compromises, that everyone understands them, and that we can all move forward together. But it is important to be able to occasionally just really dig in with your own belief, with your own conviction of what you think is going to give us the most bang for our buck. Sometimes without all the data, sometimes without all the, sometimes without everyone agreeing. But there are times in drug discovery where that kind of notion of let's drop that and go to the next thing is the exact opposite of what you should be doing, and you have to somehow navigate between those two totally opposing forces. And that's honestly what makes it the most fun as well, right? That's having those difficult decisions in different parts of the way your business works, from science to corporate, that's why I like my job. Because I like those hard things, and I like sometimes, hopefully mostly getting it right when I can, but it's okay sometimes to get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the deal, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I always remember someone who was on this podcast many, many years ago who described drug discovery as something like a series of monumental failures punctured by moments of brilliant insight that make it all worthwhile.
We've had an amazing 6 months, so it's very easy for me to, be very philosophical about this. But I have this amazing quote that I learned really recently from a parenting perspective. I have a son who's a bit like me and doesn't deal with failure very well. And I learned this amazing quote, which apparently is attributed to Nelson Mandela, but I don't know. I've been trying to embed this into my son, which is, I never lose. I only win or learn.
Yes.
A very nice quote. How did I not know that before? I'm 41 years old, and this is an incredibly important life lesson for somebody who is quite competitive and wants to do well all the time. So that actually, that's true. Drug discovery, you either get the thing you want or you're learning a new route round. So it's quite a nice way to characterize the challenges that you'll encounter along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose you touched on this there as well. The other part of it, I suppose, is where the decision-making responsibility lies, right? And it lies with you and your team when you're in, rather than having to generate the data and do the operational bit and decide how to do something. You're actually deciding what to do, which is a different type of decision, isn't it?
Yeah, that level of responsibility for for what we're doing is ultimately, the whole point of having an executive team is that they can, and we are, like I say, very, very collective, despite having our own sort of remits. We have a very good culture of consensus building with the exec team, and so decisions we all own them, and we always make sure that that's translated to the rest of the company as well. But although we might there's a large degree of responsibility for those decision making, but we're so enabled by having a good team. That's the only important thing we've ever done, really, and foremost to date. Until we get a medicine, into a new medicine to a patient, the only important thing we've done is build the team that might make that happen. We can do fantastic technology, have amazing innovations and inventions, but none of it means anything unless you have a great team that you feel like is kind of collectively self-actualizing in some way, that it is actually being able to do something that gives it any chance whatsoever of success. And that, of course, we interact as the executive. Any decision making, we have we're massively dependent on information, data, ideas, and good judgment as well from the whole rest of the team. But yeah, ultimately the buck has to kind of stop with us, and it's our job to make that happen and make those good judgments as often as we can.
Yeah. And on that note, then, obviously, so after a little bit of time getting your hands on the platform and getting to know the team, and I'm sure taking things apart and putting them back together again, and all those kinds of things, you moved into the CTO role and took on that executive responsibility. And I'm aware that these things are often an evolution rather than a step change. But what have been your observations about moving into that C-level role compared to other positions you've held?
Yeah, I would say, and I think everyone will struggle with this at different parts of their career. But the biggest transition I had to make was to get comfortable with becoming, it's probably a bit over the top to describe it as de-skilling, but I'm of course much less technical than I was 3-4 years ago. But I'm a technical guy and I like to get involved and do things and stuff. So there is always a process, and you go through this for the entire career, and I'm sure it's not stopping now, but it's that particular, for me, that particular transition of being somebody who was, deep in it, always, luckily, like I say, I've got fantastic scientists who I can fully trust, but I still am much less technically involved, and making that transition because I had to, because now I have to think about what's next, what's the next 6 months, how are we going to maximize on what the market area needs to play, how are we going to get new funding, how are we going to do this, that, and the other. And if I was deep in every data set and trying to dictate what we should do next with it, then obviously I couldn't do that job properly either. So that was a big kind of, and I think that's probably quite common. I think everyone who makes the kind of transition in their career that I've made will have that quite a similar journey, I would have expected. Maybe some of the things but I expected that in some ways. That's obviously going to happen. Maybe the bit I didn't realize was the amount of kind of cultural, political, within the company, without the company, stuff that occupies a lot of your time as well. And that's very common to other leadership roles outside of science. But maybe I wasn't quite as prepared for that as I might have been if I'd spent more time thinking about, rather than just blindly following my nose into an executive position, actually being a bit more organized about it. I might have thought more about that, but that is quite a big part of, I think, anyone in an executive position's job is to make sure that people are, going and like all that stuff I was talking about before, connected, getting some sort of consensus, or if there isn't consensus, being able to navigate those choppy waters. And that takes a lot of thinking, talking, a lot of diplomacy, a lot of kind of emotional intelligence stuff, and that I wasn't necessarily flexing, prior to being in these more senior positions. But it's been really good fun, and I've enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot about me as well. I've probably learned as much about myself as in any other sort of transition in my career. But it is different, you have to be ready to make time for that kind of part of your role is working through those kind of political machinations of the executive team job, which is running a company, and it has a million facets.
Absolutely. And you talked a bit about, you mentioned culture there as well, and sort of setting the right cultural environment and making sure it's things like you talked about the office and those sorts of things.
The ping pong table.
Yeah, exactly. Things that are going to help people to gel and thrive and do good work and stuff like that. That kind of, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of the time, this doesn't go for everybody, but a lot of people early in their career think those things aren't important, and as you go through your career, you realize just how important they actually are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I was slightly earlier on to it because I think the team I had at Horizon, when I joined, oh gosh, this is 11, 12 years ago, something ridiculous like that. I joined at a moment where we were kind of new. There was quite a big new influx of people, and so we were quite aware. And I had great mentors like John Moore and others who were also sort of figuring out what is the culture at Horizon. What are we building here? Are we going to get what are we coming into, and what are we going to look at? And so we actually spent quite a bit of time talking about it. And so it's always there for me. What is the zeitgeist of the team? What's motivating us? Kind of connected. But like I said earlier in the conversation, it's super important to me individually, and I think it's if I felt like I was coming into a team or an environment that didn't have already have it or have the possibility to create that sort of special sense of shared purpose, then I feel like that would be a kind of death knell for me.
Yes.
And that's very, very motivating for me personally, is to feel like there is that sense of togetherness in the team, and I don't thrive. And one of the reasons for that, I think, being completely selfish about it, is because I actually don't. One of the things I learned about myself as I got further in my kind of leadership career is that, because I have some bits and pieces of neurodiversity that I've been learning about myself along the way, and I realised that especially as I go into these slightly less technical roles, I'm so dependent on dialogue, communication, and especially challenge. And I learned this at Horizon a little bit. It was even more obvious here that if people don't challenge me, then I feel my brain just starting to rot and stagnate. And it's not like I'm actually not particularly not great in conflict. So it's not like I'm probably a conflict avoider sometimes. it's not that, but it's just the intellectual stimulation and the fact that I can have that dialogue, and it has to be verbal. Again, it's not like it's fine written, but it doesn't get me going in the same way. It doesn't switch my brain. I doesn't get all my neurons firing. But I really, really need that to get inspired and to get excited and to become involved, but also just to understand things properly, you know, and really get into the nuts and bolts of why we're making certain observations or why we're going to make certain decisions. And I think that's part of the culture of the team as well. You know, you have to have a team that's ready to tell me, no, Ben, you're interpreting it wrong. This is how it is, or whatever else it is. And if I don't have that, personally speaking, then I can't connect and I can't feel like I understand things, but also I'm not doing my job properly either.
Yeah.
So that would be that would be super important for me. I don't think I could work in a little vacuum. I can't work in a little silo. I need people around me who are going to talk to me and challenge me and ask different questions, and to make that happen. And it hasn't always been the case in all areas of my career, even when I've been in more senior roles, if you like.
Yeah.
I've felt that not being there, and you can't really solve it quite. It's a slightly ineffable thing. You need the right kind of people around, but you absolutely, as somebody in any sort of leadership position, if that's what you need to somehow enable it, and you need to make sure that people feel comfortable in all the kind of different forums to challenge the status quo or to ask questions at least. So that's been a big part of the cultural sort of, or at least a preference for me personally. Like I said, very selfishly speaking, that is my preference. I don't think it's that uncommon.
No, I don't think so. And I think it's always interesting how much, I think when you're early in your career, you look at people who are in senior positions and you think, oh my gosh, they know so much stuff and they know how to do things. But, and yes, that's true to an extent, but a lot of it is about, as you've said, you learn about yourself and you learn how to get the best out of yourself, and you develop your character and your soft skills and your perspective and your principles and that sort of stuff as much as you develop the actual skills that you.
It's like becoming a parent all over again. All the stuff you learn about yourself suddenly when you've got kids, you're, oh my god, it's me.
There are a lot of parallels. So, Ben, you touched on it earlier, and we will make sure we control the timing of the release of this podcast to coincide with all of this.
Sure.
Tell us about what's next at
it's like I say, we have had just a completely crazy, we're slightly bucking the trend. I think briefly globally, I think, the UK, I don't want to talk loads about the kind of the VCs. But there is a sense, I think, in Cambridge and maybe UK wide, that we're about sort of 6 months behind what we're seeing in the US, where they're starting to get a bit of an uptick in terms of funding and listings, and we're a little bit behind that maybe. So there is not what I would say is a sort of growth environment in Cambridge at the moment. That's not quite where FhoreMost are. We're kind of, we're still pretty buoyant, got some very, very exciting data, and a pretty clear route forward. And in terms of platform building, so from my perspective, we've just sort of finished, and we're going to launch a completely new platform.
Fantastic.
Which is amazingly exciting. It's been the fruition of about 18 months, maybe 2 years work. Literally from, here I am, had an idea, sketching on whiteboard, and then seeing it blossom with an amazing team, incredibly talented scientists who somehow turned it into something real. And it's going to be in the field of molecular glues, which is something we are super excited about. And again, is like maybe the kind of poster child of the TPD world, because just to get briefly sort of technical, targeted protein degradation predominantly has been about bivalent drug discovery, which is what Craig Crews and Ray Desjardins and others sort of suggested was possible, and has started to come to fruition with now phase 3 programs, and hopefully soon approvals from Arvinas and others with the first AR and then ER degraders. And they work in a very particular way, so they recruit parts of the cell to a target protein to get rid of it. So very cool, and lots of synergies, functionally speaking, with what kind of CRISPR does in terms of the functional output, because you're killing a protein either genetically with CRISPR in an experimental fashion, but in PROTACs development, you're killing a protein by degrading it, but you should get the same sort of functional response. But it's a drug; it's a thing that you can put into a patient, and it'll have hopefully a great and beneficial impact. But molecular glues are exciting for people because making those bivalents, and I should say that we are at FhoreMost making those bivalents as well. I'm very, very excited. Some of the great data on the drug discovery platform is about our progress in that pursuit. But they are hard to make. Our drug discovery leaders, Rich once described it as drug discovery cubed, because you literally have to do, optimize two ends and then a linker in the middle, and it's a bloody, excuse my language, it's a bit of a nightmare, and it's challenging, but it's doable. And if you put and it's rational, and if you put the effort in, you've got brilliant medicinal chemists, then you can make it work. And I think that's, that will be a consensus globally with what TPD is, what it's possible to do with it. But molecular glues are, from the chemistry side, much smaller, more traditional, should have, better chance to overcome some of the hurdles in translation, and have better PK properties, because they are just more amenable molecules and more, like I say, kind of conventional. But they cannot be predicted. You can't get, so they're all discovered from total serendipity. So of course, the famous story, which also gave birth to the Protacs, most Protacs anyway, was the discovery that the enzyme cereblon worked by this kind of targeted protein degradation mechanism via the drug thalidomide, which is a very checkered past. But now finally we actually understand mechanistically how that drug is working, and it actually works as a molecular glue. And there are a few other examples of these drugs. They're very small, they're rule of 5 type molecules, but they work by recruiting a surface modulation on a particular protein that causes the protein to do something new. So again, sort of parallels with other editing, gene editing technology, but this is kind of protein editing, but with a drug. You put a drug on a protein and it changes its behavior, and it's not hitting in a catalytic pocket, it's not knocking a kinase activity out, it's just sticking to it as a ligand. But that surface change, either because it's an allosteric or conformation, or just simply because there's suddenly a molecule bound there that wasn't there before, if that's a protein whose job it is to do protein-protein interactions, then you're going to change those interactions. And that change can have completely new, what would be called neomorphic consequences. So these are amazing drugs with huge possibility. You do anything with them, principally you go, stick it to there, just some awesome potential. But like I say, nobody knows how to make them, because you can't predict them. They have very low affinity often for either partner in an interaction. They often stick between two proteins in an unanticipated pocket that didn't look interesting before until we found it. And so there's been this huge kind of gap in some sort of rational mechanism or technology to design and discover molecular glues. And so what we've been able to do is turn our platform of mini proteins kind of in on itself. I won't go into the technical details, but it has allowed us to induce proteins or effector proteins, including E3 ligases like cereblon, into a neomorphic state. So that's a lot of silly words, but what I really mean is that I can turn cereblon into an enzyme which was previously degrading nothing to now degrading something relevant, like a target protein, an oncogene, STAT3, whatever else. And I can screen for that function systematically against any protein of interest. I want to degrade KRAS, I want to degrade MYC. I've got a screen that I can try and do that with. And what the output of that screen is a completely new pharmacophore. It can't be predicted by AI or machine learning, although of course we inform all of our exercises, and we're deeply invested in using the wonderful tools that are available. So, but this is something that can't be guessed at. It can only be found empirically. And once you've found it, you define a very sweet hotspot or novel pocket that you've induced by virtue of this technology, which we're calling GlueSeeker, not to be confused with GlueSniffer.
No.
And then you can start to design molecular glues in a rational way. You've got this incredible starting point. So we're very, very excited about it.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll launch it, or maybe we will have launched it already. We're turning it to work on all sorts of different challenging targets, and it really helps us with, our mission of this drugging the undruggable, which we haven't talked about at all actually, but that is a trademark of PhoreMost's, drugging the undruggable. One of the first companies to get on that. It kind of, undruggable doesn't really mean that much anymore, but we know what it means collectively in the industry. It means the hard things that haven't necessarily been done yet. And this is a way to really do that. So it's very, very exciting. It's very kind of, has a high affinity for our kind of core mission. And it's the kind of thing that we can collaborate with again. Again, with companies, we've got lots of partnerships. We've always collaborated on our CiteSeeker platform. We will, collaborate. We will on our drug discovery programs as well. We have that mindset. It's quite again, I think quite consistent in Cambridge. We've got a lot of companies that really love that kind of sense of partnership and modeling. And this is something we can absolutely partner on with people, because we will have people. We can't do everything. There are so many things you can do with this kind of technology, and we simply couldn't do it all. So we absolutely want to get it out there and have other people join in the journey with us. So yeah, that was again, it's a nice thing, because it's very much that's what it really excites me, that platform building. Can you do something new? Can you make it systematic? Can you make it robust? It's not just the idea. It's the turning it into something that is real, that I get most motivated by. And this is another nice example of where I think we've been able to do it quite well. So yeah, very exciting.
Fantastic. No, very exciting. And I look forward to talking more about that. But we're out of time, unfortunately.
We are. I was sure that we were only going to talk for 20 minutes, Tom. I was like, don't go on for an hour again, Ben. Just going on about stuff.
It's been great to catch up. Thank you for coming on again. And let's not leave it 5 years next time.
That's good. All right. Thanks, Tom.
See you soon.
Cheers.